Bambi, I don't know who, was stabbed to death in her bedroom by an illegal alien who was like caught 10 times and ICE. They wouldn't inform ICE, so he'd just walk every time. He got like, I don't know, I think he got arrested like 10 separate times, but because we're in a sanctuary state, they wouldn't inform ICE, and ICE couldn't pick him up after they released him from prison, and now he stabbed someone to death in their bedroom. I'm saying, Mark Geragos, when do you get to sue the state of California? I mean, if there was somebody who was here illegally and they're arrested multiple times, and you said, all right, now before we let him go, let's let ICE come in here and gather him up because we don't want this character in our land anymore, and you declared yourself a sanctuary state, so you just let him out and not inform ICE, and at some point he was on top of your wife or your grandma or your colleague, stabbing her to death in their bedroom. At what point do you get to go after the state that decided not to have this guy picked up by ICE?
You know, there's been interesting cases. There was a case where the parole officer years ago missed somebody who'd been kidnapped, and that they ended up settling that because it was a negligence theory. There's also, I think, a argument that can be made in cases that have been brought when there is a failure to notify a victim, for instance, and that's why it's now in the Constitution in California. So the victim has got a right to certain things. You've got a right to know about the plea bargain. You may not be able to veto it, but you've got a right to know about it. So in certain areas, they've constructed something where somebody can be given notification. Interestingly, that Epstein kind of scandal, if you will, that's in Florida, Paul Cassell, who was the lawyer, is a professor out of Utah who brought the original case, had...
What is the Epstein scandal?
Epstein scandal was where he got he was worked out a deal. Epstein was a hedge fund billionaire, and he got a deal where the feds did not prosecute. He was given a state court sentence. He did, I think, local jail and was given probation, although he's a registered sex offender. But
that Epstein.
Yeah,
that
he was
Epstein.
given like
Jeffrey Epstein was given a year, I believe, or
maybe
less than a
16
year.
months or something
Yeah,
at most.
in a city jail, not in a county jail, and I think it was a work furlough. But what they were able to do is they said, okay, there's a provision in the federal statutes where you have to notify the victim when you're cutting a deal of some kind. They did not do it. And the judge actually made a finding when they brought that motion that they had violated it. So you have to find some hook. You have to find some obligation by them. So the parole officer who didn't do the checks, or in this case, you didn't notify the victims. You have to find some kind of a statutory or regulatory hook.
Well, it seems to me that the state of California would be exposed, show some exposure legally, if you just said we are not going to detain these. He was detained by ICE 9 times.
And was convicted of 10 crimes in the past 3 years.
But they still wouldn't notify ICE when they were letting him out. He stabbed somebody to death.
You would have, if you filed a claim against, who was custody, Gary? Gary, was it, it must have been a sheriff, right?
Let me look for it.
Look into it. All right,
so say it's a sheriff.
Right.
If it's a sheriff and you filed the notice of a claim and they denied it, then you would sue the sheriff for not complying with a federal law. That would be your hook to get past a motion to dismiss. Because remember, generally, law enforcement specifically and more public officials generally have qualified immunities.
Right.
The immunities are that you can basically act and do your job and nobody can just sue you willy-nilly.
The story of the guy who was illegal, who's
You pretty much fleshed it out. Yeah, he was an illegal. He's been arrested.
Where?
9 or 10 times. This is in Santa Clara County, so up near San Jose. That was where the victim lived, and that was where he had most recently been detained. And Santa Clara County has a policy of not cooperating with ICE, so they weren't notified and given a chance to do something with this guy. And then he broke into a 52-year-old woman's house, mother of two, and stabbed her to death.
Okay, so now I would assume that the person who was released and who's accused was in the Santa Clara County Sheriff's custody.
It sounds like it, and he is a Salvadorian citizen.
Okay, so that would be, the law would be that the feds had a detainer on him, and if there was a valid detainer by the feds, and the detainer is basically the legal equivalent of a stop and hold and notify us, and if they ignored that, then I think that, how long ago did this take place?
This article about them finding the guy is from Tuesday of this week. So
okay, so you have to, under the applicable California law, you got to file what's called a 910. A 910 is with the municipality. They shorten up the statute of limitations. Normally, it's either 1 year or 2 years you've got for various causes of action. But when you're suing a municipality, you have to do what's called a 910. So whoever the heirs are to this woman would have to file a 910, which is a code section for the notifying the municipality that you're going to take an act. And if there was a valid detainer, that would be your hook, that they didn't comply and that they did it purposefully. And that's how you would try to pierce the qualified immunity.
I hope they sue the shit out of California. And I hope fucking Gavin Newsom has to sleep out on the front yard because the family moves into the governor's mansion, because this is fucking insane to me. We're sanctuary city. We're sanctuary state. Look, just figure out who's dangerous, get them, and get them out. What is this? Great, you're making a statement. I'm sure the woman on the wrong end of that knife, laying in bed, being stabbed to death, felt fantastic that you're making a statement. I don't know what you're trying to avoid. I'm not for kicking in apartment doors and rousting innocent, hardworking folks. But when guys that are 10-time losers are getting out of the hoosegow, feel free to send a couple of guys with windbreakers over. And if you call that a slippery slope, so be it.
Well, this is the problem with immigration detainers has been around for so many years, and it makes absolutely no sense. And it's one of the reasons that it's so frustrating to do criminal defense with somebody who's not a citizen, because there really is no way to give anybody decent advice. And now, within the last, 3-4 years, there's now a U.S. Supreme Court case putting the onus on criminal defense lawyers for giving appropriate advice of the immigration law. And there are very few immigration lawyers, in my humble opinion, that have a good handle on what's going on. I mean, first of all, the problem with immigration law, as I've kind of stumbled into it, is you've got this whole federal statutory scheme, and then you've got state court offenses, because the large majority of criminal prosecutions of aliens or non-citizens is in the state court. And so you've got federal courts interpreting the state court violations, which they never get right. I mean, so you're talking about aggravated felonies, which in a lot of cases are nothing but misdemeanors, and you're talking about moral turpitude offenses where they're struggling with whether it's moral turpitude, and it's a no-brainer that it is or it isn't. And so you've got that disconnect. Then you've got the people who are saying we're going to be a sanctuary city, and if they did it with this is the part that bugs me. If you did it because you had an ideological belief that there was something wrong, as you said, with knocking down the door to get some hardworking guy who's a busboy or a waiter who's trying to,
right,
as opposed to currying favor with a demographic politically because that's who you want to vote for you. I think that is where you lose me. I don't think you should be able to pull somebody over in the car because they look Hispanic and then assume that they're a non-citizen. At the same time, if somebody's convicted of an enumerated offense, then they've got to go into the system, and there has to be some kind of a system so that you can fight it. I mean, I'm all about fighting. If you're somebody who's been convicted in the state court, and if you got the appropriate advice from your state court lawyer about the immigration consequences of your plea, which the Supreme Court has said, U.S. Supreme Court has said, a defense lawyer has to do, then what's the point of giving advice to your client about whether to plead if it doesn't matter because you've been declared a sanctuary city and is going to be released anyway? Does that make sense?
Yeah, but yes. I don't mean but. I mean, yeah, and could we have some nuance? Like, could you say, look, we don't want people kicking in doors of busboys that are here trying to make a better life for themselves. But if you got a guy who's a dangerous felon and he's being released, that guy we don't want in our country. So simply do it with that guy, but don't do it with this guy.
You can make
do you
a
think
distinction.
we can pull that off?
Well, you've already got a enumerated list under 667 and some of the other code sections of serious felonies, violent felonies. We've already got a code section there. So if you're going to do it, why don't you say we'll be a sanctuary city for low-level misdemeanors, non-moral turpitude, and non-serious and violent felonies? I can see that. To me, that's a rational thing. But to your point, if we're going to say somebody's got to do 85% of their time or 80% of their time if you're convicted of a serious or violent felony, but once you've done that time, you're free to go back out and not be turned over to the feds, that seems to be a disconnect.
Yeah, I think you just call it common sense. Isn't it common sense? Let's put it this way. I don't know anybody who wants people who are accused of driving while brown to be pulled over and rousted by the cops. Right. I'm not saying there's not a handful of people. Maybe Ted Nugent does. But
there's also cops that do. So there's cops that makes it easier to.
I don't know anybody who wants that. I also don't know anybody who doesn't want guys who've been arrested for violent crimes and different crimes numerous times not to be deported. So I have a overwhelming majority on this side and on this side. So now it's super easy to make the overwhelming majority of right-thinking, sort of sensible, sane citizens vote, which is, or at least agree on, which is, we don't want the innocent father of three who's trying to make a better life for his family rousted and thrown out of the country. We do want Scarface over here grabbed and thrown back to El Salvador, whatever. Good. Now everyone agrees across the board. So that shall be the new policy.
Yeah, and the way that the offenses are cherry picked for prosecution is a little frustrating as well.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just to say there's enough fault to go around because you see the feds and the way they prosecute, and why are they prosecuting visa fraud for somebody who came in on a NAFTA treaty?
Right.